Good morning, everyone. As you've just heard, I'm Chris, and obviously my colleague Joe is joining us this morning. I'm going to now try and fight with the technology. Obviously, you've heard a lot from Zena and Fran, and of course the digital team just now. So some of this will be almost like a recap of some of this. But before we get started, obviously this session is about discovering your idea. But when we started looking at this, especially around the regulations, one needs to actually get an idea of the whole scope of the route and path to putting this together, because there are regulations, governance, and industry approvals that will affect the development and design of your idea. And so to look at this, I've put my own sort of spin, and hopefully something that might register with some of you. Now, Scott and the rest of the digital team are talking about their flow one. We're going to do something similar but slightly different. We're talking about property foundations. Now, very often when we meet companies, especially new innovators, we're talking about putting down the right foundations to set your project off on the right path. And as part of that, what type of product are you building? You know, if it was a property, is it just a single standalone bungalow? Or is it part of what you see is the first element of a very organized and large modular development? Or are you trying to fit into some really complex sort of system? You know, you're trying to bolt it into an existing hospital trust EPR system, or put it into overall environment that it has to accomplish all sorts of things. But also, what's the scale of your product, but perhaps even your business? You know, are you going to be a one-off project, you know, or a very small thing? Or do you actually see, as Zena was sort of talking about, where your product has the potential of growing and being either Amazon or being bought out by Amazon? And that might gear some of these elements around that. Foundations, as we know, are the integrity of whatever you're building. And as the last team was saying, the regulations and industry standards are key to making sure that when you get to the very end of the thing, it actually is ready for market. And as Zena was sort of saying, time spent here is actually going to save you masses of money. We have met, and this is where sort of the experience of Joe and I come up. We meet a lot of companies that are at the end of their road and they're about to sell it into the NHS. They've skipped some of these bits. They've either tried to fudge regs, and they call it a wellness app, and then it's not a wellness app, it's actually a medical device. Therefore, they've got to go way, way back, perhaps put a lot of things back into the product, and then spend a lot of money going through all the processes again to get it to industry. So not only is the integrity of what you're building, the foundations of it need to be strong, but also those connection points. So if it's gluing to another product, or it's getting data from another product, as I think it was Scott said, or maybe in Jordan, whilst the device that's collecting the data might be CE marked and your system is robust, what you've also got to look at is the joining of those two products, and ensure that that is what you put, because the overall system is potentially has to be regulated. That's where you see some companies only working with certain devices feeding data. A bit like Fran was sort of saying, you know, it needs to be acceptable to the market. And, you know, Joe and I have seen all sorts of examples of things, and you think, great, you know, but it's not going to fit. We recently had a system which was offered to the AHSN through the Meridian platform. It's been brought in from overseas, but it doesn't sit or fit easily with how we do things here, how we service and engage with patients, or service through GPs or pharmacies, etc. So, you know, you've spent all this time and effort, and unfortunately, you've got something that's wrong. Fran was sort of saying human factors, yeah, absolutely key. It has to be fit for its purpose. It needs to be fit for the job. Market value, and this sort of comes, and I think Zena touched on some of these parts. We often get people that have an expectation for their product, but don't really know what the competitors are charging, or their return on investment. And I think that the last team was sort of saying, you know, you've spent hundreds of thousands of pounds bringing this to market, getting it tested, evaluated, but basically there are similar things perhaps on Google Store, App Store, or wherever, that's £1 a go. And therefore it's going to take you ages to get all that money back. So, you know, those things need to be weighed up. Business models are very, very key and very difficult to establish and understand what else is there. But it's those sort of things you need to really bolster up. And this isn't Kirsty Allsop, but, you know, as again, what are the right people? Who are the right facilities? Who are the right resources? Who are the right clinical groups to help you bring this to fruition? And these are the questions that get asked in things like SBRI. So if you go for SBRI funding, they want to know that you've got the right things together to actually bring it to market, to be able to deliver at the end of it. Budget, and again, I think Zena touched on this. The more complex the product, the more time and cost it will take you just going through the regulatory process, not accounting for the actual development time. Don't underestimate. If anything, just increase by 50%, 100%, because there are going to be hits along the line. IP, and I don't know if James is talking this morning, but obviously the guys mentioned mid-tech. If you're developing something, be careful who you talk to about it. Yes, you know, you're bolstered with enthusiasm and you want to get it going, etc. But make sure you've got an NDA with that person. Otherwise, you could have just thrown it away. We've seen people that have published papers and they've gone to conferences and shown off all their idea. Basically, they've thrown away their IP. But, and I think this is key, and I dare say Joe might have some examples of this. As part and parcel of this, and that's at 55 minutes and 5 minutes for the solution, you really need to do your legwork on this. Joe, how many companies have we had come to us and sort of say, this is brilliant, and it's going to cost this amount, and then what do?
Well, yes, to be fair, we do find many companies or many people with an idea will come through to us and they haven't even done a Google search for looking at, you know, what is already out there, what the market needs are, if there's, have they done any, what the size of the market is one of the most important things. We often have people come and they say, this is a brilliant product, but actually, you know, there's only so many patients with that condition. And therefore, that means it's going to be more expensive to buy. And you need to really map this out at the very early stage, because like Chris says, you'll get to the end and for one reason or another, it will either be the technology doesn't match the problem, it's not affordable, doesn't have the right impacts and outcomes for patients, and also the, you know, the NH staff, the clinical team who have got to use this have not bought into it.
And as I say on this slide, and make sure you have a passion for it, because this is going to really test. You think, even if it's something simple, something's going to come along out of the blue and trip you up. So again, like the digital team, we've got a number of links. I've done our links slightly differently. They're through the slides. They're in context with the slides that we're presenting. I've made them very small because I know in past we've had people trying to scribble them down, and I believe the AHSN is going to make these slides available. So write a brief. that is key. Now, Zena went through a whole series of things of exploring ideas for things. Now, one of the things that we've often done with people in this sort of starting off process is that they have a passion about a technology. They believe a technology will be the solution to X, etc. Or they know the solution. We're going to do this. So, as we usually say, is don't write something that says, I want a suspension bridge to take us across a river. Talk about a crossing, because when you've done your research, your market research, and looked at the actual problem you're trying to solve, you might only be driving one vehicle a month over that bridge. And therefore, does it need a suspension bridge? Or you might want a suspension bridge because you know that as soon as you started the traffic, then you will get a flood and you will need the size of something to take a motorway across it. So it's looking at that so that you evolve your specification. And as again, the guys said, you know, your technical specification. Now, the other thing about this sort of thing is look at the Eastern Value Proposition tool. You'll need that when you get down the other end. But there are aspects which you need to think about in relation to how you step forward. And I'm going to just go on to the next slide. So once you've got your problem scoping and you look at the indirect and products and service, not just the bells and whistles, because when you come to selling it, you want to sell what it does, what the outcomes are, what the benefits are, not its features. While the features make it happen and while the technology make it happen, what the customer will be asking for, and we very often see this with technical companies, is that they are trying to sell the technology and not necessarily the what it's going to offer to the company, to the clinicians. Identify all of the bodies that's going to engage. And again, the guys were sort of saying this, and there are others than just the regulatory bodies. There's a professional, clinical, there's the trade bodies. And also, as I think Zena was sort of saying, it's a great start to doing networking. Start to sort of mention your product, what you're doing, so that you start building a group of people that want to know more and possibly buy or trial it, which again, as Ellen was sort of saying, you know, at some point you will need someone to test and evaluate your product. Right, CE marking, as the guys said, there are a whole series of devices and CE categorization. The whole CE mark has got very complicated now because it's now a UK CA mark because of Brexit, but we'll stick with CE marks in this particular thing. There is basically CE1, 2, and 3. And in rule of thumb, if it's a CE1, you handle it like gloves and sticking plasters thing. CE2 enters the body for a period, and category 3 is implanted into the body. Now, other than actually going through the levels of device evaluation, you will also, the organizations that manufacturing it for you, if it's not you or if you're developing, will also go through a whole robust procedure to make sure what you're doing is appropriate and consistent. So obviously, if you're making a hip joint, the first one needs to be the same as the last, and also it mustn't fail. So there's a whole series of slides there. There's the link, which I think the digital team have given you to digital products as well as the non-digital. And Joe.
Yes, Chris, I was going to say it really is important to explore what CE mark you will be as early as you can in the process, or think you will be, and then keep reassessing as you go forward. We recently had a company that came to us through the WMAHSN network. They had an alerting, well, a monitoring and alerting system for use in hospitals for various different clinical cohorts, but they had it as a CE Mark 1 product. Now, the problem there was because it actually does alert, so it alerts the staff that something might be wrong, that is not a CE1, it has to be CE Class 2A. So we've had to advise them we cannot introduce them to any NHS partner at this stage until that's in place. And now they are spending lots of time, energy, as we've said before, money, actually sorting out the problem they've got now. So be really honest with yourself and very clear with what it's going to be.
Yeah, and as part and parcel of that, what ISOs does it need to accumulate or gather? And the whole process of going through the CE marking is expensive, because there are ISOs that are on the cusp. There's one coming out in June, and there's a slide later on that, which will affect a lot of digital companies. So trials and certification, as we were sort of saying, I've crudely broken this into a proof of concept, operation development trials, pre-release, and market placement certification. And this is a bit like what Ellen was saying earlier on. There's obviously proof of concept that could be internal trials and valuations, that fail fast sort of thing. So yes, it fails fast, but it doesn't fail fast and kill anybody. So it's that sort of, suck it and see, does it really go where we want it to go? Will it do what we expect it to do? And this comes across, physical products as well as digital products. Then there's those operational, those early trials where you're going through and trying to evaluate it does either physical, what it does, or it will develop the operational and clinical output. And this is also where a lot of the human factors, and if it's a medical device now, there is a huge weight against the human factors. You will all probably know there was the Prime Minister's challenge for people to make ventilators, and there was a big hoo-ha about lots of companies and some very high street well-known companies that pitched for that, and they are not longer developing this. Part of that was around human factors, because there were so many companies making those early stage ventilators. They said, well, that's great, but we're going to put them in a ward. What if there's half a dozen of these? The staff all got to be trained on half a dozen different versions. And then if they hit the stop button, can we guarantee that we'll all hit the same button to stop it? And of course, human factors came in. It was a huge write-up for the human factors group, and Sense took over. Marketplace certification. So you've gone through all your certs. It does what it says on the tin. It's safe to use, but there is still a whole series of certification, and a lot of these are changing at the moment because of Brexit, packaging, instructions, labeling, etc. And the complexity we have at the moment of potentially UKCA and CE marking, etc. That's another topic. But what is really important, this is why you need to look further down the path of where you're going. On day one, when you start to do your development or even thinking about it, you need to think about your technical file. This holds all your risk evaluations and conclusions. So what is it like? What is it going to do? What's its outcome? And what if it does it wrong or incorrectly or not completely? You're going to make all those judgments. So one of the examples that's often given is fly modes. Got a whirling blade from the bottom, can cut your feet. Yes, we know that. But if they put a guard on it, it won't work anymore. So how do you get around that sort of thing where it's a safe product, but it's not stopped from doing its function? Manufacturing KPIs and standards, that all comes back to those ISOs. So understanding the right ISOs, and as Zena was sort of saying, that there's ISO 552,000 and something, which looks after digital safety as such. Yes, so look at all the ISOs that will affect or be associated with your products. This file will be required by the notifiable authority to certify your product. It has to go with all the certifications by a licensed certification house. You can't just give it to somebody and say, can you test if this bag holds water? You need to go to an official certification house and get them to trial, and they will test numbers of these, give you the certifications, they go into your file, and then you can submit that. If it goes around again, if you're very unlucky, you will have to pay for the whole evaluation process again. Developing your idea, pre-launch, trialing your certification, you will need to register with the MHRA. Joe?
No, sorry, Chris, I haven't got anything to add, but we've got a link to MRHA.
Yeah. The MHRA, again, when you're going through this whole process, you will need to register yourself as the responsible person, the responsible organisation. There's various complications around this, and a bit like the guys were saying in the last slides, we can go through the details of this with you at a point. These are the various notifiable bodies. There's 3 in the UK now. There used to be a lot more. Some people are registering with European notifiable bodies to get a CE mark because that opens up the market to Europe and elsewhere. That's another part we can discuss with you again. Here's some facts. This was pulled out by one of our colleagues. It costs between 1,500 and 4,000, depends on the complexity of the product. The other thing with some test houses, as we found during the COVID experience, they don't exist, or not enough of them exist in the UK, and they have to actually be sent overseas, and that causes additional costs. These are some of the things that need to be CE marked, and there's some in grey. Those are where there's crossovers between medical and non-medical type devices, etc. Obviously, once you've got your idea, you're going to deploy it, so you need all that post-certification. Again, as Joe was sort of saying, sometimes people can't get their products trialed and evaluated, and that's real chicken and egg sort of thing, because they don't have initial CE marking to say it's safe to use with patients. And again, this is where that whole risk assessment comes up. If you're involved in one of the NHS programs, that is really useful, because you can start building up a whole plethora of people you can engage with and possibly get you to assist you with files, etc. But your early work really comes into play. You know the value proposition, you know the customers you're going to be marketing, you know who you're going to target, what is why your system may be clinically superior over the competition, or better, you know, all those sort of things. You're going to have to really know your onions there. Once you've got it launched and it's all running and doing everything, this is one of the areas you might wish to look at. Get your medtech evaluations by NICE. Again, it's another badge that makes it easier to sell into the NHS, because they've gone through it and said, yes, this is a preferred method of doing X, whatever that may be. And there are various levels of NICE technology appraisal, from single to fast track, as you can see here, depending on the nature of it. And also, unfortunately, there's costs. As the guys were saying, if it's a digital, DTAC has come around, and it's becoming very, very strong now. Now NHSX is really forming itself around what it's looking for and what it does. And invariably, Orca are an excellent organisation. If you're a small a single company, you can get a lot of initial evaluation done for free. Now, one of the companies that went to DTAC in a recent conference said they flew through DTAC because they'd gone through the CE marking and they had an absolute brilliant technical file which answered 99% of all the questions DTAC was asking. And therefore it was a really easy sort of process for them. This is more on DTAC, and when you get the slides, you can go through these. Deploying and selling your idea, as I sort of mentioned earlier, it's not just about the products and features of the technology. It is really about conveying to your clients, your customers, that the real value for money, what the clinician, the hospital, you know, if you think about the audience you're pitching to, you're going to be pitching to a whole series, the clinician, the hospital, the departmental CEOs, the finance manager, all of those who can have their own viewpoint on what they want to get out of it. If it means that people come in and go out quicker, the finance manager might go, great, okay, we can get more money for the per bed, what you call it. On the other hand, he might resist that because it's making other things fluctuate more, etc. So it's really having the solid arguments. And again, as the last thing you said, having very, very good health economics to back up the reason and benefits of your technology. Right. After this, I've got my sign-off page so we can ask some questions, but a bit like new standards come and trip you up. This is before my last slide. This is brand new. We picked this up last week, a new piece of software, and a lot of companies have been pitching their medical apps as wellness apps and to try and sidestep or avoid having to go through med regs. This may alter some of those and therefore require them to do a whole lot more evaluation, testing, and certification. So it's not out yet. It's meant to be out in June, but as we know, these things usually slip. But if you're developing or you have a mindset to develop a mobile app of some sort, you must grab hold of this and make sure it does what it says on the tin. There's a link to an article through one of the ISO thing with one of their regular contributors, which talks a lot about what they're looking to get out of this. And as you might see from this, it's really around trying to tighten up the data. As we've sort of seen, and was mentioned earlier on, GDPR is now being seen as not fit for purpose, and it gets confused very often with InfoGov. GDPR is being rewritten because they've realized there's gaps in it because it's not covering enough media, i.e. the TikTok concerns around collecting and collating children's data. This ISO is going to start looking at some of that because a lot of it's around privacy, etc. I know that's a whistle-stop thing, and it's probably, knowing me, I've gone over my time. But unless Joe, no, there's some other slides after this, which gives you a whole series of other background information that may be of benefit to yourselves, depending on what you're developing and producing as part of your innovation. Open for questions, I guess. Anything that I've missed, Joe?
No, I think you've done very well considering the time. And of course, we will always be here for any of you guys to phone us up and have a chat and give you more on anything that we've mentioned today. And I know it was lovely to see Amelia's face earlier because we have spoken before and put in touch with companies for innovations from the trust, but it's the first time I've seen your face. So that was very nice, but we're finished. Thank you, guys.